They laughed when she didn't argue. Even the lawyer whispered that she was already defeated. But when the judge paused, reread one sentence, and looked up slowly, the laughter died. What no one realized was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was timing. For 22 years, Ilara Vance had built a life on whispered promises that turned to dust in the echoing silence of a sterile courtroom. Her husband, magnate Declan Vance, stood across from her, not as the man who'd vowed to cherish her, but as a polished legal predator armed with a top-tier attorney and a portfolio of lies. He painted her as a passive, uninformed socialite, a silent partner who contributed nothing and deserved even less. The gallery murmured, the reporters scribbled, and his new girlfriend smirked from the front row. Ilara simply watched, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes a calm, deep well holding a lifetime of secrets. She let them all believe the narrative. She let them mock her quiet dignity. Because in her briefcase lay not a plea, but a detonation. A single, meticulously crafted document waiting for its precise moment to shatter his world. This is the story of a vow broken, a trust betrayed, and the quiet, devastating power of a woman who finally decided to speak, not with a shout, but with the perfect, undeniable truth. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. The air in Courtroom 7 was not just cool, it was surgical, a refrigerated stillness meant to suppress emotion. It didn't work. The chill seemed to cling to Ilara Vance's shoulders as she sat, a lone, pale figure at the vast oak table, her hands folded like dormant birds in her lap. Across the acre of polished floor, her husband, Declan Vance, held court. He didn't just occupy his space, he animated it with the casual confidence of a man used to winning. His suit was a masterpiece of understated wealth, his posture relaxed in his chair as he shared a muted, confident smile with his attorney, Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a spectacle of sharp edges and louder silks, a legal hawk known for dismantling opposition with theatrical flair. Their table buzzed with associates, a hive of prepared documents and whispered strategy. Ilara's table, by stark contrast, was an island of quiet. Her lawyer, Mr. Finch, a man with kind eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit, shuffled a single thin folder. He looked less like a litigator and more like a concerned librarian. The gallery, a mix of reporters hungry for a scandal involving the tech magnate and curious onlookers, murmured with an energy that felt like a low-voltage hum. In the front row, a younger woman with artfully tousled hair and a sleek pantsuit watched Declan with proprietary admiration. Cassandra. The name floated to Ilara, not with a sting of jealousy, but with the cold clarity of a catalogued fact. All rise for the Honorable Judge Alistair Morrow. The proceedings began with the dry rustle of law. Declan's petition for divorce was straightforward, irreconcilable differences. But the narrative woven by Marcus Thorne in his opening statement was a masterpiece of character assassination painted in shades of pity and practicality. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice a resonant baritone that commanded the room without effort. "This is, sadly, a simple case of diverged paths. My client, Declan Vance, is a builder, a visionary who has poured his soul into Vance Dynamics, creating not just a company, but innovations that benefit us all. For years, he has carried the weight of this endeavor alone." His gesture toward Ilara was not unkind, but dismissive, like pointing out a piece of fading wallpaper. Mrs. Vance, while undoubtedly a gracious presence in the past, chose a different path, one of withdrawal, of silence. She disengaged from the marital partnership, showing no interest in the burdens or triumphs of the empire my client built. She became, with all due respect, a passive observer in her own life. Ilara did not flinch. She let the words wash over her, her gaze fixed on the grain of the wood before her. She could feel the eyes of the gallery on her, sensing their collective shift from neutrality to a prurient curiosity, withdrawn, passive, silent. The labels were hung upon her, and the audience nodded, beginning to see what they were told to see. "We are here today," Thorne continued, spreading his hands, "because my client, in his generosity, wishes to provide a clean, fair severance. He is offering a settlement that reflects a compassionate conclusion, not a punitive one. He seeks to move forward, unencumbered, and allow Mrs. Vance to do the same." Then, Declan took the stand. He was perfect, the picture of weary success, a man burdened by the dual disappointments of a failing marriage and a grasping spouse. He answered Thorne's soft questions with a voice tinged with regret. "I loved Ilara deeply," he said, his eyes briefly meeting hers. They held a practiced sorrow that once would have shattered her. But over the last 6-7 years, she just drifted away. The vibrant woman I married seemed to retreat into a shell. I'd try to talk about the company, the stresses, the excitements. She'd just nod and look out the window. It was like speaking to a ghost of who she used to be. He spoke of funding her little projects, the quiet, extensive charity work she did with women's shelters, which he reframed as a hobby he humored. He mentioned the vacation home she'd insisted on, omitting that it was a dumping ground for her, a place to hide her away while he traveled with Cassandra. He painted a portrait of a lonely, melancholic woman, leeching the vitality from his dynamic life. When it was time for cross-examination, Mr. Finch approached with a hesitant step. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice lacking projection, "you claim Mrs. Vance was uninvolved. Did she ever provide any input, any ideas, in the early days of Vance Dynamics?" Declan offered a tolerant smile. "Oh, she was always supportive, of course, a loving wife. But ideas? Strategy? No, that was never her realm. Her realm was the home, or at least it was." The gallery tittered softly. The dismissal was so complete, so patronizing, it was accepted as truth. Then, it was Ilara's turn. As she walked to the stand, the silence was profound. She looked small in the tall witness chair. Marcus Thorne approached her like a scientist approaching a delicate, possibly inert specimen. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone deceptively gentle, "your husband has testified to your emotional distance. Would you say that's accurate?" Ilara looked at him, her gray eyes calm. "I would say we grew apart," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Grew apart," Thorne repeated, as if tasting the phrase and finding it bland. "A mutual drifting. Yet you are now contesting the very equitable settlement he offers. Why, if the distance was mutual—" "I am not contesting it yet," Ilara said simply. A flicker of annoyance crossed Thorne's face. He shifted gears. "Let's talk about tangible contributions. The marital estate is complex, centered on Vance Dynamics. Can you tell the court the valuation of the company's primary subsidiary as of last quarter?" Ilara blinked. "I don't know." "You don't know," Thorne echoed. He turned slightly to include the judge in his disbelief. "Can you name the lead underwriter for your husband's last series of funding?" She paused. "I don't recall." "The percentage of his shares that are vested versus unvested?" A longer pause. Her gaze drifted to her hands, then back to him. "I don't know." Each "I don't know" was a soft, dull thud. With each one, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial curiosity hardened into disdain. Whispers snaked through the gallery. "She really doesn't know anything. She's just after a paycheck." Declan's posture relaxed further. He allowed himself a small, sorrowful shake of his head, as if witnessing a confirmed tragedy. Cassandra, in the front row, didn't bother to hide a small, vindicated smile. Thorne, sensing blood, moved in. He held up a document. "This is the settlement offer, generous as detailed. Do you understand the clauses regarding the non-disclosure and mutual release of claims?" Ilara looked at the dense text. The silence stretched. Finch half rose. "Objection." Counsel is badgering. I'll withdraw, Thorne said smoothly, waving a hand. The witness's difficulty speaks volumes. He turned away from her, his back a statement of finality. The message was received by everyone. She was not just ignorant. She was incapable. A non-entity. The laughter wasn't raucous. It was worse. It was a collective, muffled eruption of contemptuous amusement from the gallery, a release of tension. They had come for a battle and found a surrender. Even the bailiff coughed into his hand, hiding a smirk. Ilara saw Declan's lawyer lean over and whisper something in his ear, the words clearly reaching her in the quiet. It's done. She's already defeated. Ilara returned to her seat, her face a placid mask. Inside, a different scene unfolded. Each "I don't know" was not a confession of ignorance, but a conscious act of refusal. She knew the valuation, down to the decimal. She knew the underwriter was the Goldman and Weil Group, and that Declan had complained about their fees for weeks. She knew the vesting schedule by heart because she'd helped draft the original equity plan before there was even an HR department. But to answer would be to play his game on his board with his pieces. Her silence was the reset button. It was the void into which she would introduce her own reality. The final witness for Declan was his CFO, a man with a permanent squint from staring at spreadsheets. He confirmed in dry technical terms that Ilara Vance had no official role, no operational knowledge, and had never attended a board meeting or financial review. The company's success, he stated flatly, is solely due to Declan's vision and execution. As the man stepped down, Thorne rose. Your Honor, based on the testimony today, specifically the petitioner's clear and unrebutted account of the marital breakdown, and the respondent's demonstrated lack of involvement or even basic knowledge of the marital assets, we move for a summary judgment to adopt the proposed settlement as a full and final resolution. There are no material facts in dispute. The respondent has offered no counter-narrative, no evidence to the contrary. She has, with respect, failed to participate in her own defense. Judge Morrow, a man with a face like weathered stone, looked down at Ilara. His gaze was not unkind, but it was impatient, weary of domestic theater. Mr. Finch, does your client have any substantive response? Any evidence to counter Mr. Vance's claims or to suggest the proposed settlement is inequitable? All eyes swung to Finch. He stood, looking painfully small. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, we would ask for the court's consideration of the full context of the marriage, a long-term partnership. Context is not a counter-argument, counsel, the judge interrupted, his voice tired. Do you have evidence or not? Finch's shoulders slumped slightly. He looked at Ilara, a silent question in his eyes. This was the moment. The precipice. The gallery held its breath, sensing the kill. Declan allowed himself a faint, triumphant exhale, his eyes already on the door, on the future. Ilara gave Finch the barest, almost imperceptible nod. Finch's demeanor didn't transform dramatically. It solidified. The uncertainty vanished from his posture. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice finding a new, firmer register. We do. In fact, we have a single, consolidated piece of evidence that speaks directly to every claim made here today, issues of contribution, asset disclosure, and the petitioner's credibility. It has been properly filed and served on opposing counsel as supplemental discovery. He reached not for his thin folder, but beneath the table, producing a thick, black-bound binder. He placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud that echoed in the silent room. We wish to enter this document into the record now. Its contents are, we believe, dispositive. Marcus Thorne's head snapped around. He hadn't bothered to look at the supplemental delivery, assuming it was more of Finch's weak procedural paperwork. Declan stared at the binder as if it were a poisonous creature. The judge's eyebrows lifted. The laughter, the whispers, the smug certainty, all vaporized, replaced by a vacuum of pure, stunned anticipation. "What is this, Mr. Finch?" Judge Morrow asked, his weariness replaced by sharp interest. "Your Honor," Finch said, his hand resting on the black cover. "This is my client's response. It is titled Project Sisyphus." A profound silence, thicker and heavier than any that had preceded it, swallowed the courtroom. The thud of the black binder on the oak table seemed to still reverberate in the air, a seismic event that had shifted the very tectonic plates of the proceeding. Marcus Thorne recovered first, his legal instincts overriding his surprise. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant ambush. Evidence submission at this late juncture is prejudicial and violates the rules of procedure. If Mr. Finch had substantive evidence, it should have been presented during discovery, not as a theatrical flourish." His voice was tight, a whip crack of indignation meant to cover the first flicker of unease. Judge Morrow did not look at him. His eyes were fixed on the binder, then on Ilara, who met his gaze with the same calm, unflinching stillness she had maintained for hours. He held up a hand, silencing Thorne before he could build steam. "Mr. Finch, counsel's objection has merit. Explain this." Finch, with his newfound solidity, placed both hands on the binder. "Your Honor, the document was served electronically to Mr. Thorne's office at 8:02 p.m. last night, well within the window for pretrial supplemental disclosure as defined by Rule 7.4. Its timing is strategic, not covert. Its relevance is absolute and goes to the heart of asset disclosure, fraud upon the court, and the petitioner's credibility. To have introduced it earlier would have allowed for obfuscation. Its power is in its totality presented in this forum." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Fraud upon the court is a serious allegation. Counsel." "The evidence is contained herein, Your Honor," Finch replied evenly. Thorne spluttered. "This is outrageous, a desperate ploy. We have had no time to review this manifesto." "You've had since 8:02 p.m., Finch said quietly. "The court time is valuable. Shall we proceed?" Judge Morrow made a decision. "Overruled. The document is admitted. The court will take a 30-minute recess for Mr. Thorne to confer with his client. We will reconvene, and you, Mr. Finch, will provide a summary of this evidence. Bailiff, please provide me with a copy." As the judge rose, a low wave of sound finally broke the silence. Shocked whispers, the frantic scribbling of reporters, the rustle of people leaning forward. Declan Vance was already at Thorne's table, his face pale, his earlier relaxation replaced by a coiled, furious tension. He spoke in a low, rapid hiss, his eyes darting between the binder and Ilara, who was calmly collecting a glass of water. Cassandra, in the front row, looked confused, then worried, her eyes searching Declan's back for reassurance that did not come. In the hallway, the atmosphere was electric. Finch guided Ilara to a quiet alcove. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. Ilara nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It was not a smile of joy, but of a long-awaited alignment. "I'm fine, Robert. Let them look." In a private conference room, Thorne had the binder open. His experienced eyes scanned, not reading every word, but absorbing the structure, the headers, the cold, hard proof typeset within. His face grew grimmer with each turned page. Declan paced like a caged animal. "What is this?" "Declan," Thorne finally said, his voice dangerously calm. "She has dates, account numbers, transcripts, the Sisyphus offshore holding in the Caymans, the Ether Art Trust in Luxembourg. You testified under oath you had no hidden assets. You told me you had no hidden assets." "She can't have that," Declan whispered, his bravado crumbling into disbelief. "She's guessing. She's fishing. It's hearsay." It's not hearsay if it's a financial record with routing numbers, Declan. It's not a guess if she has a transcript of you talking to Stefano about moving the paintings the day after you filed your sworn financial statement. Thorne slammed a hand on the table. You committed perjury. In my courtroom, with me as your counsel. Back in the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Every seat was filled. Word had spread. When Judge Morrow re-entered, he carried the binder, a single place marker holding his page. His expression was unreadable, but the earlier impatience was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. Mr. Finch, the judge said, seating himself. Proceed. Finch stood before the bench, addressing the court. Your Honor, Project Sisyphus is a chronicle. It is the true record of a 22-year partnership and its systematic dismantlement by the petitioner. It is divided into 3 sections, each more damning than the last. He turned to face the gallery, his voice gaining strength. Section 1. The Hidden Architect. It details the origins of Vance Dynamics core technology, the sustainability algorithm that now drives a 70% market share. He opened a copy of the binder. Contained here are dated journal entries from Ilara Vance, with hand-drawn logic flows and ethical parameters. There are scanned copies of napkin sketches from the Grindstone Cafe, dated 15 years ago, with her handwriting and Declan's notations. Most critically, there are forwarded emails from Declan to his then-partner, dated 12 years ago, where he writes, and I quote, using Ilara's core framework for the prototype. It's brilliant. We'll file the patent in my name for now, cleaner for investors. We'll sort her stake later. That stake was never sorted. Her name was systematically erased from the innovation. A murmur rippled through the room. Declan's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle pulsed in his cheek. Section 2, Finch continued, is titled The Financial Sentinel. He turned a page. This is a forensic accounting ledger, maintained by Mrs. Vance over the last 7 years. It cross-references every public financial disclosure Declan Vance has made, for loans, for previous litigation, for SEC filings, against the reality of his assets. It lists, with account numbers, SWIFT codes, and dated transaction records, 3 offshore holding companies used to siphon profits and hide liquidity. It details the purchase of 7 high-value post-war paintings acquired through the Ether Trust at a reported cost of $50,000 each, but with accompanying insurer valuations showing their true worth at over $2 million apiece. All omitted from the marital asset schedule provided to this court. Thorne was on his feet again, but his objection was weak. Your Honor, this is stolen private financial data. Finch didn't miss a beat. It is data observed and recorded by a spouse with legitimate access to shared financial environments and documented when discrepancies with sworn legal statements emerged. It is not stolen. It is uncovered. Judge Morrow's gaze was like a gavel. Continue, Mr. Finch. Finch took a breath. Section 3. The Broken Vow. Documented. The room grew colder. In our state, a person may legally record a conversation if they are a party to it. Mrs. Vance, after years of gaslighting and financial manipulation, began to keep a record. This section contains annotated transcripts of audio recordings made in the marital home office. He looked down at the page, and his voice, for the first time, held a tremor of something like disgust. The selected transcripts are date-stamped. From 2 years ago, a discussion where Mr. Vance brags about inflating corporate debt to depress valuation for the purposes of this very proceeding. From 11 months ago, a phone call on speaker where he tells an individual named Cassandra that, quote, the prenup is ironclad, but the real trick is making her think she's getting a gift, not her share. A gasp came from the gallery. Cassandra shrank in her seat. Finch paused, letting the horror sink in. Then he found his place. But the entry I wish to draw the court's attention to is from November 14th of last year. The context is Mr. Vance speaking to his business partner, Stefano Ricci, about the impending divorce. Finch read aloud, his voice clear and cold. The beauty of it, Stefano, is that the law rewards the storyteller, not the saint. And I own the pen. She's so quiet, she'll just fade right off the page. Finch stopped reading. He looked up at Judge Morrow. The judge had gone very still. He was staring at the open binder before him, his eyes fixed on that same line. He read it once. Then his eyes flicked back to the beginning of the sentence and he read it again, slowly, deliberately. The entire courtroom watched, breath held, as the weight of those words settled upon him. His head then lifted, not with speed, but with a ponderous, grave deliberation. His eyes swept past Finch, past the pale, rigid figure of Declan Vance, and came to rest on Ilara. In that look was a dawning comprehension, a fury at the deception attempted in his courtroom, and a profound, icy respect. The silence was absolute. The earlier laughter, the whispers, the smug certainty, they weren't just gone. They felt like a distant, shameful memory. Your Honor, Finch said into the stillness, his words falling like stones. My client's silence was not ignorance. It was strategy. She was not fading off the page. She was, with immense patience, rewriting the entire book. We move that the petitioner's proposed settlement be rejected in its entirety as having been offered in bad faith, predicated on fraud, perjury, and the concealment of material assets. Furthermore, we submit that this evidence warrants a criminal referral for perjury and attempted fraud upon this court. The dam broke. Thorne began shouting about context, about marital privilege, about entrapment, but his voice was a desperate, crackling noise against the monolithic truth now occupying the room. Declan Vance was no longer a magnate or a victim. He looked like a man watching the walls of a carefully constructed prison close in on him, built brick by brick from his own lies, each one meticulously catalogued by the quiet woman he had believed wasn't listening. Judge Morrow did not slam his gavel. He simply raised a hand, and the noise died. His eyes were still on Ilara. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner. Is there anything you wish to add? Ilara stood. She smoothed her simple skirt. She did not look at Declan. She looked at the judge, and when she spoke, her voice, for the first time, filled the space, clear, calm, and utterly undeniable. Only this, Your Honor. For years my husband mistook my silence for emptiness. He believed his narrative was the only one being written. I simply allowed him to read his own story aloud, one last time, so that the contrast with the truth would be unmistakable. That binder is not my argument. It is the evidence that his argument was a fiction. Thank you. The silence that followed Ilara's words was not the passive quiet of before. It was charged, dense with the aftershock of a detonation. Judge Morrow's gaze lingered on her for a long moment, that look of icy respect solidifying into something like grim acknowledgement. He then turned his attention to Marcus Thorne, who was still standing, his mouth slightly agape, as if his last objection had frozen on his tongue. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his tone leaving no room for theatrics. Given the evidence just presented, which appears to constitute a prima facie case of perjury and a deliberate attempt to conceal assets from this court, your motion for summary judgment is denied. Emphatically, he closed the black binder with a definitive snap. We are adjourned for the day. I will see counsel in my chambers in 1 hour. This is no longer a simple divorce hearing. Do not be late. The gavel fell. The sound was like a lock clicking shut. The courtroom erupted into a chaos of noise, shouted questions from reporters, the scuffle of feet, the buzz of 100 excited conversations. Declan Vance did not move. He sat at his table, staring at the grain of the wood, his face ashen. The victorious CEO was gone, replaced by a man whose entire foundation had been liquefied. Cassandra rushed to his side, touching his arm, but he shook her off with a jerk, a gesture so visceral it made her stumble back, her face crumbling from concern into hurt confusion. He didn't see her. His eyes were fixed, burning with a mixture of fury and sheer, incomprehensible shock, on Ilara's back as she gathered her single notebook and pen. Marcus Thorne was already packing his briefcase with violent, hurried motions. He leaned into Declan's space, his voice a low, seething whisper audible only as a furious hiss. "My office. Now. And you will explain every single line in that document. Every single one." Ilara walked out of the courtroom with Mr. Finch beside her, a buffer against the onslaught. Microphones were thrust toward her, voices yelling, "Mrs. Vance! How long did you know? Will he be charged?" She did not pause, did not look at them, her expression still that of calm, unassailable placidity. It was only when they reached the relative sanctuary of the marble-lined hallway that Finch let out a long, shaky breath. "Ilara," he said, his professional demeanor cracking to reveal the stunned man beneath. "My God, I knew the outlines, but to see it, to hear it read aloud, it had to be that way, Robert," she said, her voice quiet again, but now it was the quiet of spent energy, not strategy. A piecemeal disclosure would have let them craft a defense, create excuses. It had to be a deluge. In the judge's austere chambers an hour later, the atmosphere was frigid. Judge Morrow had dispensed with the bench. He sat at the head of a conference table, the black binder open before him. Thorne was there, his arrogance replaced by a stiff, defensive posture. Declan sat beside him looking hollowed out. Finch and Ilara took the seats opposite. "Before we discuss anything else," Judge Morrow began, steepling his fingers, "I am issuing a temporary restraining order freezing all assets, domestic and international, listed in this document. Any attempt to move or encumber them will be considered further contempt. The court-appointed forensic accountant will be granted full access tomorrow morning. Is that understood?" Thorne gave a tight nod. "Understood, Your Honor." "Now," Morrow said, his eyes locking on Declan. "Mr. Vance, you have in the space of an afternoon turned a straightforward dissolution into a potential criminal matter. You have lied under oath in my courtroom. You have attempted to defraud your spouse and this institution. Mr. Thorne cannot help you if you continue to lie. So, what is your intention?" Declan's throat worked. He looked at Ilara, and for a fleeting second, the old mask of wounded pride slipped back into place. "Ilara, this is vindictive. After all I gave you, a home, a life." Ilara met his gaze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The years of condescension, of erased contributions, of whispered plans with other women were all in the room with them, documented and undeniable. Thorne cut in, the pragmatist reasserting control. "Your Honor, my client wishes to avoid further escalation. We are prepared to renegotiate the settlement terms, immediately." Judge Morrow's smile was thin and without warmth. "I should hope so. The previous offer is a nullity, born of fraud. Mrs. Vance now holds every card. Mr. Finch?" Finch glanced at Ilara, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible incline of her head. "Our terms are straightforward, Your Honor, a full, transparent, and verifiable division of all marital assets as they truly exist, not as they were falsely presented. This includes the valuation of Vance Dynamics with my client's foundational intellectual property contribution legally recognized and compensated. It includes the liquidation of all hidden holdings, with the proceeds split according to statute. It includes the true value properties and art collections. In essence, we want the divorce the law entitles her to based on reality, not fiction. That is, exceedingly reasonable given the circumstances," Judge Morrow noted dryly. Thorne was already calculating, the fight gone out of him, replaced by damage control. We are prepared to agree in principle. We can have our accountants work together. No, Alara's voice cut through, soft but absolute. All eyes turned to her. Not your accountants, the court-appointed examiner, and the terms are non-negotiable. There is, however, one thing not on the table. Declan looked up, a faint, desperate hope in his eyes. Perhaps she would show mercy. Perhaps the silent Alara he thought he knew would re-emerge. Alara continued, her gaze fixed on the judge. We will not be seeking a confidentiality clause or a mutual non-disparagement agreement, and we will not oppose any criminal referral your office sees fit to make to the district attorney regarding perjury and fraud. The hope in Declan's eyes died, replaced by sheer terror. A civil settlement was one thing, a criminal record, the possible seizure of assets by the state, prison time. That was an abyss he had never considered. Alara, for God's sake, he choked out. You believed the law rewarded the storyteller, Declan, she said, and it was the first time she had spoken his name all day. It fell from her lips like a stone. You were wrong. It rewards the one with evidence, and you no longer own the pen. The meeting concluded in a grim procedural haze. Orders were signed. The forensic audit was set in motion. As they filed out of the chambers, Thorne grabbed Declan's elbow, pulling him ahead, already hissing about strategy for the criminal investigation that was now inevitable. Finch and Alara walked back into the now quiet main hall. The autumn light streamed through the high windows, painting long, stark rectangles on the marble floor. The fight was over. The victory was absolute. He'll try to plead down the criminal charges, Finch said quietly. He'll throw money and lawyers at it, but he won't escape unscathed, not after this. I know, Alara said. She stopped, looking out the grand doors toward the steps beyond. It was never about destroying him, Robert. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my own life. He can fight the DA. That's no longer my concern. They descended the courthouse steps together. A small crowd of press still lingered, but their frenzy had muted into a respectful distance. They called out questions, but more softly now. They were no longer looking at a victim or a gold digger. They were looking at a woman who had orchestrated one of the most stunning courtroom reversals they had ever witnessed. At the bottom of the steps, Finch paused. What will you do now? Alara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp, free air. She looked up at the sky, vast and clear above the stone edifices of power. For 22 years, her world had been the carefully controlled atmosphere of Declan's making, his houses, his social circles, his version of her. Now, it was all open space. First, she said, a genuine, weary smile finally touching her lips, I will go to the shelter on Elm Street. I've been funding their legal aid clinic. I think I'll volunteer there. My skills, it seems, are rather particular. Her smile deepened. Then I believe I'll finally take that trip to Iceland, to see the Northern Lights. I've always wanted to, in silence. She turned and shook Finch's hand, a firm, final grip. Thank you, Robert, for trusting me when I asked you to do nothing but wait. He watched her walk away, a solitary figure in a simple coat, turning not toward the line of waiting town cars, but toward the bustling city sidewalk, where she merged with the crowd and was gone. In the days that followed, the story exploded. The silence that sank a CEO, the binder of truth, Sisyphus's revenge. Declan Vance's reputation lay in tatters. The board of Vance Dynamics, facing shareholder lawsuits and scandal, forced him to step down. The DA's office, armed with Judge Morrow's scathing referral and the binder's evidence, convened a grand jury. The civil settlement, when it was finally ratified months later, was a public document, a humiliating ledger of his deceit and her due. But Alara Vance was not there to see the final gavel fall in the criminal case. She was, as promised, in Iceland, standing on a dark plain under a shimmering curtain of emerald and violet light. The silence here was not strategic. It was profound, ancient, and filled with a peace that resonated deep in her bones. She had spent years holding her breath, listening in the stillness of a gilded cage, gathering the echoes of lies. Now, she simply breathed. The quiet wife was gone. In her place was just Alara, architect of her own fate, her story finally and definitively her own.